Hello, this is James from James Films. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys are fantastic. I always appreciate the support. We've got a fun one for you today. It's a time-lapse walkthrough of a super complex scene that I put together with a combination of World Creator and Blender. If you're over on my Patreon, you'll be getting the displacement map that you see me generating right here, right now, as well as some really cool texture masks, that you see me generating right here, where you can actually blend some textures together, some sand and rocks or what have you, to generate a really cool mountainous scene. I was inspired by the Cannes National Park in the south of France when creating this scene, and I had a lot of fun putting it together, so hopefully you will enjoy the ride. So what you see me doing right here is very quickly, you can see World Creator is very fast, generating a really rough displacement map of this mountainous region, and you can just block out some textures where you want them to be very quickly as well. So I head on over to Blender, displace a plane with that texture, first subdivide it a couple times to get some detail to it to be able to displace. And then I'm going to start assembling these textures. And what I like to do is use a couple different slots in Blender to kind of load my textures up, and then use the Node Wrangler add-on to kind of add them to these little square regions, or little rectangular regions, so I know which one is which when I'm combining them all together. I can then bring in these texture masks to make sure that the texture is only applied to a specific region that I want it to. So I mixed these rocky and sandy textures from Quixel Megascans very quickly to get a really nice result. And I'm bringing in my third one here right now to combine together to just add a little bit of differences to it. You don't want it all to be looking super cohesive. You want the scene to look as natural as possible. So combining a lot of these different textures together in a seamless way really adds a level of detail that makes it much more photorealistic. So that's what I'm doing right here. I also like to set my camera angle very early just so I have an idea for the composition of my scene. And so that's what you see me doing here. I like to also add in an HDRI and a sun lamp to get an idea for where the shadows and light will be falling. This is going to be adjusted like 1,000 times as I go forward with this render, but it's just nice to have something to work with to start out with, especially when you start scattering assets like grass and rocks. So I use the scattered add-on from the Blender Market. It's a fantastic add-on, which you can use to very quickly add some biomes to your scene, and then paint using weight paint where you want them to actually show up in the scene. So you see I brought in a reference image of the Cannes National Park, and you notice the grass kind of fills in the crevices and somewhere in the peaks in some places of the mountain. And I want it to affect there, but not at all on the beach. So I painted in the grass and scale things up and move things around so that they show up exactly where I want them to on this kind of mountainous region. I'll go back and play a bit more with the textures just to make sure that the colors are looking good and matching well with the kind of darkish green of this grass and other little assets. And then I actually bring in an ocean texture, which I've been kind of developing and playing around with in other renders. And it uses actually a Voronoi noise to generate some really nice looking caustics, which won't really actually read as much with this render because I'm actually going to end up with a nighttime render at the end of this. But it's just a nice texture to add in some really cool water that looks realistic. I've also developed this really interesting flat plane texture, which I added an image of a ocean wave from polygon.org, or Polygon, Andrew Price's website. And so I used that and actually sculpted it a little bit to add some detail, some geometry to it, some three-dimensionality to this plane, so that these actually look like ocean waves coming in. I just duplicate them like crazy. These planes render like super quickly, really don't kill my render time at all, so I don't mind having a whole bunch in my scene. I actually want to pull down the ocean floor a little bit more so that the volume absorption that's a part of the ocean texture really reads well and makes it look like the water's actually getting darker the deeper you get, as it physically should in the real world. I'm tweaking again a bit more with these waves. I always come back to things over and over again as I go through with renders and tweak the lighting, tweak the textures, tweak the coloring. Don't be afraid to really spend your time with your renders to get everything looking proper. But also don't spend too much time, you want to move on, you want to be developing new things. It's kind of this balance that you're trying to strike. But for this, I just wanted to tweak around just to make sure that things were looking really nice. And you'll see actually after tweaking around for a bit, I actually will fire off a test render, which will take about 10 minutes. And then I usually like to just kind of play around in Photoshop just to see what my final render potentially could look like. And then I like to sometimes draw on my renders to get an idea for the scene. But first you see me adding in a bit of volume here and a mist pass, which I'll then be able to composite in Photoshop to add this atmospheric fall off to the image and make it look even more realistic. Because the further away you get from the camera or from just your viewpoint, if you're looking way off into the distance, the kind of less contrasty the world actually looks. And that's just the nature of light actually falling off as it hits your eye, as it passes through the density of the atmosphere. So on kind of misty, clear mornings in the ocean, you get this kind of fall off as you look off, and it kind of looks almost like pure white as you get really close to the horizon, really far away. So I tried to mess around with that a bit here. I also like to just append assets from different projects and just to see if they work in the scene. This is a little house that I developed for another project recently, and I wanted to see if it fit in my scene. I didn't really actually end up using it, but it just kind of gave me an idea for scale, which I was struggling a little bit with this one. I felt like it was looking like a little island instead of a large island. But regardless, I just fired off a render just to play with in Photoshop. And you see me messing around with some filters here, some lighting things. I composited in that mist pass just to see if that would look good in the scene. And then I actually would draw on this a little bit too, just to get an idea for what potentially I could add to this back in Blender. So I kind of wanted to put a house and have this path of stairs leading up to it, maybe put a boat or something in there. I know you love my sketches here, they're fantastic. But, you know, they kind of help me inform what I want to do back in Blender here. So I'm back in Blender, just totally revamping my scene here. I'm going to be sculpting some things with my terrain and actually starting to add in some details from BlenderKit. I wanted a house, but I didn't really want to spend too much time sculpting it. The focus of this exercise for me was more so on the landscape generation. So the house was kind of a second thought. Usually I'd model a house or kind of work on it on my own. But for this one, I didn't want to spend so much time on it. So I actually got a really nice house asset from BlenderKit and threw it way in the distance of my scene. I also wanted to add in some stairs to this scene, like I said, to kind of draw your eye in. And so first I actually took the path curve tool and just kind of had this bend around to where I potentially wanted to have these stairs go. This just gives me an idea for the directionality and the sort of composition of the stairs. And then you can use a really great add-on called Archipack to bring in these stairs and then bend them and make them larger, raise the height of them, extend them out, move them around. It's really quick to generate some really nice stairs this way. There's probably an easier way to do this, but I just duplicate them and kind of shift them around and combine them up together. You don't really notice the crack or the cracks between them or the splits between them like you see here. From a distance, so it doesn't really matter as much that they're separate objects combining together. So I end up using 3 of them just to get that nice kind of curve to follow the path and lead your eye up to the house up on the hill. And just this takes a little bit of time just kind of pulling and pushing things around, but at the end of the day, it's not too hard to get a really, really nice result here. So you can see this already looks pretty awesome. You know, you got this nice handrail going along with it as well, and it leads you really nicely to the ocean's edge, the water's edge there. So I textured that up pretty quickly from texture from Quixel Megascans as well, which I think worked pretty well for the scene. And then I actually wanted to go back into Scatter and kind of paint away a bit of the grass that was there so that you have this nice beach path that leads up to the staircase. So this is where I actually started to mess around with colors again, and I realized I really wasn't sold on the lighting of the scene. So I'm about to go back and completely change the feel of the scene. And so I started to add in palm trees to get an idea for some of the stuff in the distance here, but it just wasn't really working, I felt like. It was a nice daytime scene, and I might actually come back to this later, revisit the scene, and mess around with the lighting a bit more for the daytime aspect of it. But I ended up actually going for a nighttime scene, which really, 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 I thought looked really cool for the scene. So here we go. I'm about to add in the physical starlight and atmosphere add-on, which is really, really fun. It's kind of similar to the sky texture that's now built into Blender in some of the newer versions, but it gives you a lot of control over the atmosphere, over the lighting, and a lot of control over just the general coloring of your sky, which I think is really fun and adds for a lot of really nice flexibility with the renders to really make the scene look nice. So I ended up settling on this kind of early sunrise type coloring to it, where I thought this had a really nice reflection, especially off the left edge of the screen on that ocean. Really nice bounce off that wave there. And so I was struggling a little bit with the darkness, the luminosity of the house and some of the surrounding area, because that was my focal element of the scene and it was getting lost in the lighting. So I experimented a little bit with some different lamps from BlenderKit and settled on this kind of interesting one that you'd see maybe in streets, like walking along paths or something, and just used this to fill out some of the lighting on that staircase leading up to the house. This added some nice brightness and again led your eye up to that house, which was one of the key focal elements of my render. And I'm not sure if you noticed this earlier, but I enabled overlays for my camera, and you can add in some really nice, it's like a the rule of thirds and also a center lines, guiding lines to show you compositionally where things should be. So I wanted that house to kind of be in the upper right corner of the rule of thirds. And so I threw that up there, and I think that looks really, really nice and really draws your eye in well from these ocean waves rolling in all the way up to the house in the scene. A lot of experimentation with lighting here. I added in some different point lights, which sometimes can introduce some fireflies. I actually ended up introducing a little bit of fireflies, especially for those street lamps, but they're far enough away that I was able to kind of blur them out in post anyway, and it didn't really matter as much. But just keep an eye on that when you're working. Try to keep things as simple as possible with lighting. Like I say all the time, I tend to just use mainly an HDRI and then a sun lamp to create these scenes, which is, I think, all you really need for most cases. Here I just wanted a light from that window in the house, and then some for those street lights going up. I'm searching for a table and chairs here to add in to the beach. Maybe this is a place where you can have breakfast in the morning, who knows? Just a nice cozy little scene here. This is the kind of stuff that we need in the middle of the winter. It's been below freezing here for the past couple of days, so I'm trying to think of warm places. So I have this nice little warm scene here with my table and chairs and a little candle on the table, kind of a romantic scene. So that's really cool. So I ended up firing off a render around here, tweaking some things in post, and yeah, called it a day. So again, if you're over on Patreon, you're going to be getting that nice displacement and those texture masks. This was the first pass of the scene, and then this was the final version. I really, really enjoyed putting this together and lighting this together. So hope you enjoyed this little time-lapse tutorial, and I'll see you on the next one. Subscribe for more. Thanks so much.